Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I welcome you to Cricket South Africa's media briefing on the highly publicized forensic report. As you may be aware, Cricket South Africa has very specific procedures on how the organization manages communications, but as you will understand, for reasons soon to be explained, the distribution of information around the forensic report is handled very differently and sensitively. To avoid any potential consequences of miscommunication, misunderstanding, or misrepresentation, Cricket South Africa is releasing the summary forensic report to our internal stakeholders, sponsors, and the media simultaneously. Just to give a bit of background, at the outset, I would like to dispel any misconceptions of insolence and defiance in matters relating to the release of the complete forensic report and reaffirm CSA's commitment to transparency. I reiterate what has been said in various meetings, media briefings, interviews, and various stakeholder communications. The forensic report was commissioned to be used as an internal document and never intended for public release. Any utterances to the contrary of this was done so without mandate from CSA. The independent legal opinions that CSA obtained clearly outlined the potential risks and significant damages the organization could face where the full report was to be released and distributed publicly. Before I launch into the summarized details of the report, allow me to explain the rationale behind the legal concerns. The Funduti forensic report released to CSA on the 31st of July 2020 covers a 48-month period from 2016 to 2019 and contains extensive information about the organization, individuals, and third parties, which are, as Cricket South Africa, have not been able to investigate, corroborate, or clarify in its totality as yet. We are not claiming that the report is inaccurate in any way. It is important to understand that Funduti's forensic analysis is a single-sided report, and not all individuals or parties mentioned have had the opportunity to provide responses to the findings as yet. For current or potential litigation on matters relating to this report, the identity of certain people or entities will not be disclosed at this time, as such disclosure may cause harm to the interest of those juristic parties or CSA, and could potentially prejudice any legal action that CSA is pursuing or may take accordingly. The summary report contains footnotes of where certain identities were not revealed in the interim. So you may be asking yourself, why the change of heart? Following requests from the Ministry of Sport, Arts and Culture, South African Sports Confederation and Olympic Committee, members of the media, and concerns from sponsors and employees about the contents of the Funduti forensic report, CSA has, with legal counsel, decided to make the summary forensic report available to all stakeholders, including cricket-loving members of the public, via the media and other distribution channels. The full forensic report was made available to CSA's members' council for inspection conditions related to confidentiality, including the execution of non-disclosure agreements in line with the protection of the organization. In the interest of cricket and to mend relations and relationships, CSA's members' council unanimously agreed to make the summary forensic report available to all stakeholders, including the board of CSA, its executives, and after all interested stakeholders, including members of the media. Importantly, the summary of all findings and recommendations is a direct extract from the Funduti report and has not been amended by CSA's lawyers, save for matters detailed in the report. Maybe that's worth repeating. The summary of all findings and recommendations is a direct extract from the Funduti report and has not been amended by CSA's lawyers, save for the matters detailed in the report. As previously reported, the CSA board appointed Bowman's attorneys to assist the independent audit and risk committee members to project manage a legal roadmap to give full effect to all findings and recommendations in the Funduti report and identify matters that require further investigation and/or corroboration. Introduction of the Funduti forensic report. Upon the suspension and subsequent dismissal of CSA's Chief Executive Officer, Mr. Thabang Mooroa, CSA's Cricket Council and its board members unanimously agreed to appoint a service provider to conduct an investigation into various governance issues and allegations relating to possible failure of controls and insufficient executive oversight. Funduti Forensic Services completed the forensic audit and delivered a 4-year final draft forensic report for the period covered was January 2016 to December 2019 to CSA Audit and Risk Committee on the 31st of July 2020. The scope and objectives of the Funduti's investigation was as follows. Determine whether CSA management and board of directors adhered to the governance framework. Determine whether effective internal controls were in place to prevent or detect material misstatements or other irregularities. Determine whether key subcommittees reasonably relied on management information and applied reasonable levels of professional skepticism to such information before recommending such proposals for approval by the board. Determine whether there were completeness and adherence to key policies such as delegation of authority, declaration of interest or declaration of conflict of interest, procurement policy, enterprise risk management policy, employee expense claim policy, fraud prevention policy, asset management policy, and cell phone policy. Determine the completeness and correctness of management reports over the last 12 months. Determine whether CSA's funds were used for intended purposes. Determine whether decisions were made in the interest of Cricket South Africa. And finally, provide feedback on allegations against Thabang Mooroa. Funduti prepared an investigation report inter alia various findings, conclusion, and recommendations. This was called the final draft of the forensic report. The full forensic report touched roughly on 20 areas of concern. First being revocation of media accreditation, relationship with SACA, allegations of non-responsiveness by CSA, appointment of service provider X, step-in rights in Western Province Cricket Association, step-in rights in Northwest Cricket, framework agreement entered into between GSC and Cricket South Africa, production agreement entered into between GSC and Cricket South Africa, expenditures relating to CSA credit cards, extending loans to affiliates or unions, effectiveness of internal controls, examining payments related to tax and VAT liability, structure of the board, fraud detection and prevention, value in kind sponsorships, organizational design, appointment of Chantel Moon as head of HR, reviewing policies, review key procurement contracts, and NSA Vulindlela agreements. The Funduti report was used in the proceedings to discipline Mr. Mooroa, and who was subsequently dismissed. The conduct of Mooroa is dealt with extensively in the forensic report, and many recommendations are to act against him. While the summary forensic report contains all detailed information, we summarize the key findings below for easy reference. The first one being revocation of media accreditation. The recommendation is as such: instituting disciplinary action against Mr. Morwe for the revocation of media accreditation, which contravened Section 76(3)(b) of the Companies Act, Clause 2.1 of the CSA Code of Conduct, and Clause 4.1 of his employment contract. Review and update CSA's media guidelines, policies, and protocols, as well as the CSA accreditation policy to outline the processes to be followed in addressing an impasse between CSA and the media. The second one, relationship with SACA. The recommendation is that CSA board that CSA board considers instituting disciplinary action against Mr. Morwe for failure to protect the interest of CSA in that he failed to ensure that SACA was paid timeously. Allegations of non-responsiveness by CSA. The fact that the board members had to intervene in operational matters indicates that management and or Mr. Morwe failed to respond to SACA accordingly. Appointment of service provider X. The recommendation is instituting disciplinary action against Mr. Morwe for failing to follow procurement processes in the appointment of service provider X and failing to act in the best interest of CSA in terms of Section 76(3)(b) of the Companies Act, in that he caused CSA to pay service provider X an amount of $3,019,244.82 without following procurement policies and procedures. Register a criminal case in terms of Section 34 of the Prevention and Combating of Corrupt Activities Act 12 of 2004. Obtain legal advice regarding the desirability to institute legal action to recover funds paid to service provider X in view of no evidence of delivery of the actual service. Step-in rights at Western Province Cricket Council. Recommendation is that CSA board considers instituting disciplinary action against Mr. Morwe for the following: failing to act in good faith and for a proper purpose and in the best interest of the company in terms of Section 76(2) of the Companies Act, in that he withheld information relating to the signing of the lease agreement as well as the withdrawal of the suspension letter by Funduti stocks. Failing to comply with Clause 12.4.2 of the MOI, which required that the board shall, as soon as possible after determining that action is required to be taken by the company as contemplated in Clause 12.4.1, notify the affiliate member or associate in writing thereof. Failing to exercise the step-in rights with immediate effect, as he only informed Western Province Cricket Association of the decision to step in on the 21st of September 2019, 14 days later, in a letter dated 20 September 2019. Failing to act with integrity in that he failed to inform CSA board of the change in the trigger this agreement had actually been signed. Failing to act with a degree of care, skill, and diligence that may be reasonably expected of a person carrying out the same functions in relation to the company as carried out by him, having his general knowledge, skills, and experience in terms of Section 76(3)(c) of the Companies Act, by not informing the board of the signing of the CPUT lease agreement and the withdrawal of the suspension notice by Funduti stocks, and failing to take the lead in ensuring that the board's directive was implemented without delay in terms of Section 76 of the Companies Act. For causing CSA to incur costs in the amount of $565,000 relating to the arbitration matter against Western Province Cricket Council, which costs could have been avoided had he exercised due care, skill, and diligence as expected of a director. step-in rights at Northwest Cricket. The board considers instituting disciplinary action against Mura for failing to ensure that the Northwest Cricket kept and provided audited financial statements for the period of 2 years, 2016-2017 and 2018-2019, and failing to obtain board approval for the extension of the administrator beyond 6 months. Framework agreement entered into between GSC and Cricket South Africa. The recommendation is instituting disciplinary action against Mura for failing to act in good faith and a proper purpose in terms of Section 76(3)(a) of the Companies Act, in that he did not inform FinCom and the board that the due diligence on GSC was not conducted. Failing to act in the best interest of CSA in terms of Section 76(3)(b) of the Companies Act by not ensuring that the due diligence was conducted and the bank guarantee was obtained. Failing to act with degree of care, skill, and diligence that may be reasonably expected of a person carrying out the same function in relation to the company in terms of Section 76(3)(c) of the Companies Act, in that he failed to show leadership by ensuring that the risks identified by Manning were properly addressed. He failed to ensure that the FinCom and the board's instruction were complied with in relation to the provision of due diligence report. He failed to ensure that the FinCom and the board take decisions based on properly presented and complete information. He failed to ensure that CSA does not suffer losses or potential losses flowing from the GSC's failure to fulfill its obligations in instances where their bank guarantee was not obtained. Instituting disciplinary action against Appiah for failure to exercise due care and skill expected from a reasonable person in a similar position, in that he failed to ensure that the FinCom and the board's instructions were complied with in relation to provision of the due diligence report. Production agreement entered into between GSC and CSA. The recommendation is instituting disciplinary action against Mura for failing to act in good faith and for a proper purpose in terms of Section 76(3)(a) of the Companies Act, in that he was aware or ought to have been aware that the RFP for production services included matching rights clause as the RFP was sent to him by Appiah and Becker. Failing to act in the best interest of Cricket South Africa in terms of Section 76(3)(b) of the Companies Act in finalizing the appointment of GSC. Failing to act with a degree of care, skill, and diligence that may be reasonably expected of a person carrying out the same function in relation to the company in terms of Section 76(3)(c) of the Companies Act, in that he was aware or ought to have been aware that the production agreement between CSA and GSC did not include any matching rights clause, and failing to exercise due care, skill, and diligence in terms of Section 76(3)(c) of the Companies Act in finalizing the appointment of GSC, in that he ought to have identified the risks of possible litigation against CSA by unsuccessful bidders. Expenditure relating to CSA credit cards. The recommendation is to approve a detailed credit card policy, provide guidelines relating to expenditure on alcohol in terms of approved credit card policy, provide guidelines relating to the use of credit cards for traveling expenses in terms of the approved credit card policy, limit the allocation of credit cards to the CEO and the CFO, centralize procurement of goods and services as provided for in the supply chain management policy, keep a register of all clothing items distributed to CSA staff and stakeholders to ensure that the items are distributed to the correct recipients, institute disciplinary action against Mura for failing to ensure that CSA has an approved credit card policy, which resulted in the inappropriate use of CSA's funds, extending loans to affiliates or unions, amending the composition of the board to include independent directors in order to ensure independence and objectivity in respect of matters relating to affiliates, review the delegation of authority document and the financial assistance to affiliates and associate members relating to FinCom's authority to approve loans to affiliates. Pardon me. All right, thank you. Effectiveness of internal controls. Commencing with the process of nomination of candidates to fill the independent non-executive director vacancies. Ensure that the appointment of independent non-executive directors is in line with the Companies Act and the CSA MOI. Review the nomination committee's terms of reference to determine whether it is desirable for the chair of the board to be a member of this committee. Examining payments related to tax and VAT liability. The report contains no express recommendations in relation to the examination of payments related to tax and VAT liability. Structure of the board. Commencing with the process of nomination of candidates to fill independent non-executive director vacancies. Ensure that the appointment of independent non-executive directors is in line with the Companies Act and CSA's MOI. Review the nomination committee's terms of reference to determine whether it is desirable for the chair of the board to be a member of the committee. Fraud detection and prevention. CSA to consider conducting detailed investigations into the following allegations. Allegation of mismanagement at Cricket Club A in Mpumalanga, and allegations of illegal practices taking place at Cricket Union B. Value in kind sponsorships. Develop a value in kind policy or guideline. Ensure that there is centralized control and management of the value in kind products. Keep a detailed register of items distributed to CSA staff and various team members in respect of value in kind products. Organizational design. Funduti were further not able to compare how the current CSA organizational design looks like versus the organizational design project recommendation, as not all positions as per the approved organizational design have been filled as yet. Appointment of Chantel Moon as head of HR. The recommendation is advertise and fill the position of HR manager or head of HR as per the approved organizational structure. Institute disciplinary action against More for contravening paragraph 3.4.2 of the supply chain management policy in the appointment of Moon. Failing to act in the best interest of CSA in terms of section 76(3)(b) of the Companies Act, in that he caused CSA to pay People Link $1,609,335 for the period from August 2019 to April 2020 without following procurement processes, and failing to act with a degree of care, skill, and diligence that may be reasonably expected of a person carrying out the same function in relation to CSA in terms of section 76(3)(c), in that he appointed People Link without following procurement processes. Reviewing policies. The recommendation is instituting disciplinary action against More for failing to ensure that procurement processes were followed in the appointment of NSA Vulindlela. Update the procurement policy and procedure to clarify that deviation must be done prior to entering into a contract with a supplier, as opposed to CSA ratifying minor breaches of procurement policies after the fact. A tender process should be followed in the future in relation to appointment of security-related service provider to ensure that CSA benefits from obtaining competitive bids. Review of key procurement contracts. Funduti could not determine whether procurement processes had been followed in the procurement of goods and services in terms of the top 40 contracts due to lack of documentation. And finally, on the findings, NSA Vulindlela agreement. The recommendation is instituting disciplinary action against Mure for failing to ensure that procurement processes were followed in the appointment of NSA Vulindlela, update the procurement policy and procedure to clarify that deviation must be done prior to entering into a contract with a supplier as opposed to CSA rectifying minor breaches of procurement policies after the fact. Again, a tender process should be followed in the future in relation to appointment of security-related service providers to ensure that CSA benefits from obtaining competitive bids. Having highlighted the Funduti concerns, Cricket South Africa has already taken action on many of the findings and recommendations of the forensic report and has further engaged Bowmans to detail a roadmap to address what further actions will be taken by CSA, who will be responsible for these actions, and when are they expected to be completed. Once consensus has been reached by the board and Bowmans, the detailed roadmap will be presented to Members' Council and key stakeholders. Very important, a third-party assurance provider will be appointed to provide stakeholders with assurance that the required actions have been taken. The current Bowmans draft roadmap recommends the following key areas to be considered by Members' Council. Ensure that the MOI and related governance processes lead to the appointment of a board with significant range of skills to perform, with a majority of board members not being members of the Members' Council or participants in the member structures. Separate the Members' Council and its workings from CSA through amendment of the MOI and bolstering the constitutional documents of the Members' Council so that regulations of members happens at that level. Ensure that the Board of Cricket South Africa can always constitute a nominations committee and appoint directors to fill casual vacancies quickly, noting that Members' Council appoints the board at the general meetings and retains strong influence at that particular level. Take steps to ensure that Members' Council fulfills its role by resolving the geographical alignment issues. Clarify the roles, responsibilities of each type of member, affiliate members, ancillary members, etc. The membership requirements and the regulations governing such membership, including but not limited to the impact of failure by each member to adhere or comply with the membership requirements, review the terms of the MOI relating to step-in rights to learn from the experiences in the Western Province and Northwest step-ins as detailed in the Funduti report. Deal in the MOI with consequences of failure of members to comply with the provisions such as the current 10.9 and provide that members adhere to appropriate governance requirements before they can exercise their rights pursuant to the MOI. Bowmans further recommends that the following agent steps are concluded before the annual general meeting scheduled for the 5th of December 2020. They write as follows. We recommend that the following matters be dealt with. Internal disciplinary proceedings against many employees mentioned in the Funduti report are either ongoing or completed. The evidence in regard to other employees of CSA mentioned in the Funduti report should be brought to the attention of the board and delegated to the Human Resources and Remuneration Committee or other appropriate governance structure to brief external legal counsel to advise on possible disciplinary action and assist with taking such appropriate disciplinary action where necessary. Given the steps taken against many other employees, the board needs to take and be seen to be taking a consistent approach against all CSA employees in respect of whom the Funduti report identifies allegations of serious misconduct. In addition to the disciplinary proceedings referred to above, the provisions of the Funduti report relating to Western Province and Northwest Step-ins and the framework agreement between GSC and Cricket South Africa should be referred for legal opinion to determine if action should be taken against any external parties to recover funds for Cricket South Africa. The recommendations in regard to the appointment by CSA of a certain service provider named in the Funduti report should be followed. A legal opinion should be obtained regarding recoveries of the monies paid by CSA and the relevant notifications under the Prevention of Organized Crime Act of 1998 be made. Management of CSA should be instructed to develop an appropriate credit card policy for approval by the board, including clear guidelines on procurement of travel, purchases of alcohol and clothing with credit cards. In addition, further investigation should be taken on whether to take steps to recover any amounts due to Cricket South Africa through the unlawful use of credit cards. Management of CSA should review and update CSA's media guidelines and protocols, and the CSA accreditation policy to outline processes to occur when an impasse happens between CSA and the media. What approval required for these certain actions? The process of the necessary appointments of the internal audit and risk position should be commenced immediately, and management should conduct the process under the guidance of the independent directors on Audit and Risk Committee. Management of CSA should be instructed to prepare a draft value-in-kind policy for approval by the board and should confirm the measures to be taken to ensure that there is centralized control and management of products and a register of items distributed to staff and team members. Following the recommendations regarding contracting with major third-party security provider, management of Cricket South Africa should be requested to update the procurement policy and procedure to clarify that any deviation from the policy must be applied prior to any contract being entered into, as opposed to CSA rectifying breaches after the fact. A collaborative team with representation from Members' Council and the board has been appointed by Members' Council to work in consultation with external legal advisors to review Cricket South Africa's Memorandum of Incorporation. This task team submitted a total of 19 key principle proposals to Members' Council, and approved principles have been applied in drafting a new MOI, which will be reviewed by the MOI review task team. It is envisaged that the new MOI will be lodged with CIPC and approved by the 23rd of October 2020 in order to be adequately prepared for the AGM. In conclusion, it is important to note that external auditors PwC have had full access to the complete forensic report before passing a clean, unqualified audit opinion for 2020. Let me repeat that. It is important to note that external auditors PwC have had full access to the complete forensic report before passing a clean, unqualified audit opinion for 2020. While Cricket South Africa have preferred to investigate the Funduti recommendations and completed the process in its entirety before sharing the findings of the report with our very important stakeholders in cricket, CSA has had to release the report as is due to the aforementioned factors. The matters detailed in this memorandum by Funduti is for consideration by the board to allow the board to deliberate on the issues raised and to speedily reach consensus on the key components of the roadmap and who should take responsibility for preparing and finalizing the detailed roadmap. Cricket South Africa officially places on record, while we understand that the forensic report is no more than an analysis prepared by Funduti on their investigative findings, Cricket South Africa's Members Council, Board of Directors, and our executives will not tolerate fraud, corruption, or mismanagement of any kind. Although the forensic report is not a court judgment and the findings and conclusions therein have not been tested, CSA takes the Funduti recommendations and Bowman attorneys' reiteration very seriously. Further to CSA's commitment to address the forensic report findings, the Members Council is confident in the board's ability to effectively address the challenges and focus on protecting the long-term sustainability of Cricket South Africa. Cricket South Africa is committed to act with determination, without fear, favor, or prejudice to restore the image of the organization and to continue promoting the beautiful game of cricket. I thank you.
Mr. Mogodi, thank you so much. Members of the media,